And last week, Education Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohammed, for the first time, commented on the ongoing lecturer strike, terming it extremely disruptive and punitive to parents and students. The CA spoke as she unveiled a committee tasked with getting to the root of the matter. And joining me in studio now, we have Professor Amutabi Morris, who's VC for Lukenya University. Good morning and thank you for joining us. We also have Dr. Charles Muhwai, who's the Secretary General for University Staff Union. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Dr. Wandia Njoya, who's an education expert. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I'll come to you in just a bit. But Kenya's higher education sector has grown in many folds. The number of universities, both public and private, has tremendously grown, translating into higher education enrollment. But today's institutions of higher learning are in the spotlight for various reasons. As we speak to lecturers and who are on strike, issues of quality of higher education have been raised. Are our universities in touch with the market demands and changing trends? Universities have also hit headlines because of poor management, corruption, ethnicity, among others. What's our higher education system getting to? So I'll come to you, and also the question that we're asking today is, what is the solution that we possibly need to our ailing higher education and universities education system? How can the issues ailing our universities be sorted out? Do let us know what your thoughts are as we continue with this discussion. I'll start with you, Professor Amutabi Morris, and there's evidently a big problem that we have in our university education system currently. What would you say, maybe with your opening remarks, is the issue that we have?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think first and foremost, we must appraise the Kenyan education system, higher education system, because we've come from very far away. At one time, we had 50,000 Kenyan students studying in India. We have now almost 20,000 students studying in South Africa, UNIS, and other places. So the opening up of higher education is a godsend opportunity for many Kenyans as possible to get higher education instead of the exchequer losing a lot of money in foreign exchange by taking students abroad. However, what needs to happen, and I think this is happening among stakeholders, is to create an opportunity where all stakeholders come together, and if there are any elements coming up that may ail the higher education sector, we resolve them amicably. One of the areas afflicting higher education in Kenya, for example, is higher education funding. For example, government-sponsored students, in terms of what's now going on the unit cost per government-sponsored students, who are now in both public and private universities. That can you appraise these and have payments done on time so that private universities who have these students in their hold and so on do not suffer in terms of expenditure. Then number two is training at PhD level. This is an area that we have a tremendous amount of need right now. We require about 2,500 PhD graduates every year, but we are producing about 400 PhD graduates every year. So there's a very big shortfall in that area. And then the other issue that we need to address, I think, is creating programs that are market-driven. We know there are programs in universities, like people have pointed out, that are not actually marketable, that students are taking courses, and then when they finish those programs, they are not employable in Kenya or abroad. So can we put market-driven programs? And the number four, which is very critical, is to appraise the research portfolio in all our universities. Many universities that develop fast and many countries that are developed spend a lot of money on research. The UN and I think other organizations in the world recommend that 2.5% of GDP and GNP should go to funding research. But many countries in Africa, only South Africa is spending 1.8% GDP on research. Nigeria is spending 0.8% on research. Kenya, we have tried very hard, but we are spending less than 0.5% GDP on research. NACOSTI and others organizations have been putting up budgets, but they don't fund that. And you cannot develop fast as a country, improving research outputs in agriculture, improving research outputs in industry, and so on, in order to put Kenya on the map for development, if you don't spend on this.
All right, Dr. Wandia, let me come to you. Quite a number of issues brought about there by Professor, and possibly if we scale them down a little bit, what are some of the small gains and wins that we need to have for our universities for us to make progress?
Okay, let me just take a departure because I think the actual problem facing the universities is the market, actually. What has happened is that capital has realized that there's a lot of money to make in education, and so they are sabotaging the government expenditure on education to privatize. So even, you know, when we are dividing, when we are sponsoring government students to go to private universities, we're making it more expensive for the exchequer to provide education, but this money is going to private entities. And that's the whole problem with education, that we are privatizing education when it should be a public good. So for now, I would say the thing we need to do is to bring back public education to the public sector. We need to put money into the universities, we need to pay lecturers properly, and we need to sort out the management, because management is a huge problem. When the government said that they were not funding education, the university managements decided to look for other ways to make money. But what that did was that they turned universities into businesses, and academics are very bad business people. We don't do business well. So we started doing real estate, we started offering many courses, putting campuses everywhere. But the thing we didn't realize is that for us to have those things, we need to spend. You need to spend to make money. And so universities started spending more on marketing, on real estate, on PR, and all these other things than on the actual education. So we need to overhaul university managements, stop this marketization, and actually put money into education. And also we need to restructure university managements so that they are more accountable in terms of the amount of money that they are spending, because right now it's almost free fall. University vice chancellors can spend money how they want and they are getting away with it. So we need more accountability in the expenditure of money that is taken to universities.
Okay. All right. I'll come back to you. Dr. Muhwaya, do you agree that there is a problem we have there? And of course, one of the things that is unique to Kenya when it comes to higher education and to universities, actually not just higher education, even primary education, we have very many private institutions, including universities. They've mushroomed everywhere. Is that necessarily healthy? Because there is the business side of it, and that seems to be taking more preeminence than the actual education.
Thank you, Mike. First and foremost, I agree entirely with what my fellow discussants have put forward. There is a problem within our university system, within our education system. When you look at the privatization of education, in my view, privatization may not be bad. But the whole thing is about management of this. In our public universities, you will find that the government went out of its way and allowed self-sponsored programs in our university. It was a good idea. Maybe the government felt that universities were to be allowed to make some money to augment what the exchequer was giving them, to allow them to run their programs. But I think that's when the rain started beating us, that this particular avenue has been abused. The people who are left to carry out this privatization and manage them have mismanaged them. But that's where we come in and say maybe the government needed to have put a keen eye after allowing them to regularize. Yes. Because money came in and people forgot about the academics. People started just looking at opening up new courses for them to make money.
And that was to make it more attractive to the student and just bring in the numbers.
Yes, bring in the numbers, but bring in our money.
Right.
That actually stopped the original path of universities to teach and carry out research. So that then you found everybody's running around, moonlighting and going to make money here, because it's all about how many hours, how many contact hours am I putting in? That's the money that we're doing. It actually stopped us from the path that we were moving on. But overall, I think the whole problem is on management of these institutions. These managers, the vice chancellors, have not been accountable. They have become like, they move around like colossus. They don't listen to anybody. Look at it this way. Universities are supposed to be run by university councils. Now, the chairmen of these councils have been put in the pockets by vice chancellors, by virtue of them being allowed to do business with these institutions. So the councils cannot actually check on these vice chancellors. Neither is the parent ministry doing the same thing.
Doing the same thing.
Yes.
Allow me to bring in Prof here. He's a vice chancellor himself. Prof, do you agree that vice chancellors, one, have not been accountable, and two, they've concentrated more on business more than education? The vice chancellor is there mainly to manage the institution, to ensure that they churn out quality education,
Right.
but that's not happening.
I think I agree with my colleagues, but I think it will be hard, it will be not fair to make it a
blanket,
homogeneous, a blanket statement on that. I would like us to do what we call case-by-case analysis of which vice chancellor and the operations in the universities. Of course, there has been that sentiment that perhaps issues of management and mismanagement could be a problem. And I agree that there was too much emphasis on marketization than quality, and we have seen this happening. But the point I want to point out, and which is critical for us, is that let us not begin to blame privatization of university education. The best universities in the world today are actually operating on private mode. Harvard University is a public entity operating almost 98% as a private model. What happens is that students who go to Harvard are sponsored by the government, but Harvard runs almost entirely as a private mode. The best 10 universities in the world is Harvard, Stanford, Duke, Princeton, and so on. They all run on a private mode. What I think Kenyans need to do, and as a country we need to do, is that we stop the hemorrhage of a foreign exchange to India and other places by creating higher education in this country. We are losing a lot of money through the exchequer because we are sending students in their thousands.
But the question then would be, is that money being utilized appropriately to do what it's supposed to do? Because
now,
yes,
that's the question.
Yes, we are saving the money
Yes.
of all those students who are going,
right.
But we are doing that to build other institutions and just...
Now, that's a question, and I think it's a question that Dr. Mukwai is raising, is that how do we then manage these resources in a manner that allows us to develop as a country? And I want to point out that there's no university in this country that has grown and has not made the neighborhood grow. You will pass through Juja years ago before Yikwat picked up as a university. Now you go to Juja, it's very developed. I was at Moi University for 10 years. Keses was basically a small little market. Keses lessons have grown up because of Moi University. So universities have brought about development in all those areas where they're located. What we need to do, and I agree with my friend Dr. Mkwai, is that can we organize those resources strategically in order to empower the people, in order to empower these students, so that we don't emphasize really marketization, but the quality of the programs, as well as divesting and investing this money in those areas, infrastructure improvement and so on, so as to make the Kenyan graduate very marketable globally, but at the same time, making sure that the university-industry relationships are kept to have Kenyans getting trademarks, patents and so on, competing with other universities across the world. Because right now, many of the research products that we have in Africa today, Kenya was at one time #2 in research output in research. Now we have gone to #4, #5. At one time, we were ahead of many countries in Africa. But because of not investing the money that you're talking about from marketization of programs, money is coming in and it's not managed properly. I want to bring models from South Africa, for example. UNISA has 300,000 students. Nobody's complaining about UNISA because quality management. So universities need to emphasize quality management. Not rushing through graduates through programs, but emphasizing quality. And quality is an internal and also external factor. That the university itself manages quality, and others also come to ensure that the peer reviewers that you are emphasizing quality. Makerere has now 45,000 students. 25,000 are privately sponsored students. 20 are public sponsored. So Makerere is a public university, but actually operates almost 60% as a private, and it's very, very big praised as, as a good model.
Dr. Andia, let me come to you. And question here being, do you agree that possibly the money that is being saved, quote unquote, first of all, is not being utilized properly? And secondly, who is going to enforce that if the very people given the management of education have not shown the goodwill to do that?
Okay, first let me disagree with my two colleagues because I think there's no good privatization. You know, once you privatize a university and you put the market logic into it, then you cannot also say we are going to talk about quality education, because quality education will start being measured by how much money is being brought in. In fact, even now, some universities are saying we'll measure whether your research is good by how many people want to sponsor it. And that does not consider whether this research is necessarily good for the community or for the country. And with marketization and privatization is when you start having questions of competition. So now we are talking about competition instead of talking about contribution to society. So I don't think there's any good privatization that can ever happen because the logic is different. The logic of privatization is profit. The logic of real education is cooperation and contribution to society. Those are two diametrically opposed ideas. So you can never have good management through privatization of universities. We need to make the public universities public by giving them money from the exchequer and from our taxes, and instead we are wasting it on other things, including campaigning for 2022. But we give money to the universities, but also make the universities more accountable for what they are doing in terms of research and in terms of teaching students. And in fact, actually, the reason why the vice chancellors are putting the councils into their pockets is because they are making money. So let's close those those loopholes, so that the only thing the vice chancellor is doing is ensuring that learning and research are going on. Now, we can't compare ourselves to the Harvards and the Dukes because those are private universities, and people pay a lot of money to be in those universities. In fact, most students in the US cannot afford to go to those universities. So those are universities of the rich.
But it doesn't mean that our education, or rather our universities in Kenya are cheap. They're also very expensive.
They're very expensive because we've been mismanaging both from the side of the exchequer and from the side of the universities themselves. If we have a properly public university system, that is properly managed, with the resources going to teaching and research rather than all these PR campaigns and branding and setting up businesses and all that kind of thing, then we can have a good public education. And once public education is good, even the private universities have to style up, because if you're asking students to pay to come to your university, you have to offer programs that are either good or better than what is in the public university.
All right, and I want us to take a short break, and we'll come back and look at that, and possibly also hear from you what your thoughts are in regards to our university system, the fact that we have very many private universities. From what Dr. Wandia is saying, one of the problems that we have is just that privatization, where then with the quality of education is affected by the fact that this is a business, and of course a business is going to be run on a different platform than that which would be of education. So we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back. And if you have any comments or any thoughts that you'd like to share with us, feel free to do so. And the Twitter handles are going to be displayed as we carry on. For now, we take that break.
This is KTN News.
Standard Newspaper keeps you locked all week with our electrifying magazines. On Sunday, we have Generation Next, Twinkle and Sunday. On Monday, catch up with Crazy Monday. Tuesday, get Financial Standard. Wednesday, we have Hustle. Thursday, hashtag is the one to read. Friday, get a life with Pulse. And Saturday, Eve winds up the week. It's now more inclusive, informative, concise, colorful, and more entertaining. The Standard. Feel the change.
Codeine cough syrup is creating an opioid addiction crisis in Nigeria. At least 3 million bottles are drunk every day. But how does the syrup get from pharmaceutical companies to drug dealers? Undercover journalist Rona Meyer exposes the criminals behind the scam and the damage being done to millions of young people. Africa Eye, sweet, sweet codeine. Nothing stays hidden forever.
Every Friday, KTN News and the Nairobi Securities Exchange have embarked on a journey to educate you on the capital markets industry.
The biggest need in the market is in the affordable housing space.
There's need for us to really pass the education down to the real basic level.
Featuring in-depth interviews from industry captains to the market analysis.
On a speculative level, yes, it's a good time to buy.
The Trading Bell, every Friday from 3:30 p.m. with me, Abi Agina.
This week on Area Code, I shall be exploring the rich history one of Nairobi's oldest estates has to offer. Constructed in the 1940s, Kaloleni Estate has been home not only to Kenya, but indeed Africa's leading leaders.
President Milton Obote, this was his house, B16.
The youth in the area helped me paint a more modern picture of the expansive estate known for its old housing structures.
Ulikuwa unapata kuna grao, lakini sasa makatele wana grab wakiuza sasa unapata hata vijana wana mahali pa kucheza boli.
Join me, Timothy Otieno, on this week's episode of Area Code, only on KTN News.
This is KTN News.
It's now 23 minutes to 8 o'clock. It is the way it is right here on Morning Express. We are looking at higher education and specifically universities. In case you're joining us now, with me in studio, we have Dr. Wandia Njoya, we have Dr. Charles Muhwaya and Professor Amutabi Morris. And we are looking at the state of our universities. Now, let me come to you, Professor. And you had earlier on mentioned that, we have quite a number of private universities, specifically in the U.S., that seem to be working, some of the top universities, but that doesn't seem to work for us here. Right. What is it that they do differently that we're not doing here? For instance, you'll find admission to some of the universities, like you'd mentioned, maybe like Oxford University, is extremely difficult for you to get in there. There are certain restrictions that they'll have, whereas our universities here, it seems that anybody or almost everybody can go in regardless of your results, and the numbers is what carries the day.
Right, thank you very much for that question. And one that actually I'd mentioned earlier on, that in America, some of the best universities are actually private, whether it's Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Duke, Cornell, Stanford, and so on. And the issue that I want to talk about is management, just effective management of university affairs. What ails our institutions is actually bad management. And I want to point out why I think that if we model our public and private universities in a manner that makes them very productive in terms of research, effective research, so that we're able to contribute patents and trademarks like other universities do. I want to point out that the success of Harvard is predicated on many principles, that people being accountable and transparent. Admission to Harvard is very competitive. They take the best quarter. They take only 1% top in your class. Then you get admitted to Harvard. The same thing to Yale, to Duke, to Princeton, and so on. Then there's a second-tier private university in America. For example, Vanderbilt, there's Johns Hopkins University, there's a Rice University. Those are second-tier. So that if you fail to get to Harvard, now that's your second-tier, and so on. Public universities in America are flagship universities. Every state has a flagship university. Like University of Illinois, where I attended, is a flagship university for the state of Illinois. Like the California schools, for example, universities, Indiana University, so that every state has also the flagship universities. But what I want to point out is that we can create Harvards in Kenya. We can create Dukes and Princetons in Kenya. What we just need to do is to divest our resources as well as targeting areas. Because many universities in Kenya don't have niche areas, like Harvard Business School. You go anywhere in the world and you are from Harvard Business School, you are hired because they know Harvard Business School produces the best. But in this country, apart from a few who will probably champion medicine or education, law, and so on, we don't have universities with the niches that they have, that if you want to look for the best graduate in business, you go to this school. You want to look for the best graduate in medicine, you go to this school.
Okay.
So that's lacking, that we have spread so much, are doing so much, that we don't have that niche and specialization that you can excel and compete with the best in the world.
All right, Dr. Muhwaya, do you think that maybe that's one of the problems that we have? And more importantly, could it be as a result of the fact that it's a business, not an education center? Therefore, there's no need to specialize. Maybe those who are the creators of those universities really looked at it as a business opportunity rather than being educationists.
Thank you, Mike. I have to agree with what Professor is saying. Our universities lack specific niches that they can pride themselves about.
And why is that? Is it because it's more of a business than an education center?
This is because the people who have been given the mandate to run these institutions, most in the public universities, they lack that particular approach. They are more oriented to making money and profit than actually doing the academic bit. Of course, the academic part was the beginning. But when they got in there, they realized that with this privatization, they can make an extra coin. Our university car parks never used to have many cars. And even those that were there were very old jalopies. But you get to our universities now, you will get huge cars, nice cars. And that is what they're priding about. And this has made them even lose their focus on research. Go to Tanzania. In Tanzania, researchers carry out research that are oriented towards addressing societal issues. In our universities, most of the research is more towards actually making your own CV academically. They don't look at what is it in the society that we can actually address when we are carrying out.
So what needs to be done? Do we need a total overhaul of the whole system?
Indeed, there has to be a total overhaul. And although we are saying that there is need to have autonomy, the government must pay a close attention to what is happening in the universities. Because if we are allowed to do our things, we have shown the world that we are unable.
And maybe then Dr. Wandia's logic would come in, because the government being the gatekeeper for such things, one, education is a right to every Kenyan. Obviously left to the private entities, then they have proven that they cannot do this. So should we go back to a point where we only have properly instituted public universities?
In my view,
that makes the level, the playing field level.
In my view, public institutions should be the best in any given country.
So you agree with Dr. Wandia that maybe we should do away with private universities and
Not totally. Private universities that can actually help the government provide quality university education should be allowed. But the whole thing is, whether you're private or you're public, management, accountability of resources that are available to you to help give Kenyans quality university education.
So who would be in charge of that management?
For me, I would still put it at the government. The government must play a key role in this. Look, in this country, we have watched our public health facilities go down. And instead, we have seen private health facilities come up. It would appear like that is what is going to happen
with our education.
With our education, if we are not careful. So the government must come in and say, look, we have to put controls here. We have to set ourselves goals, targets that we must be able to get. Otherwise, it's a free fall. And if the whole thing is not controlled, then the poor will not be able to access
education.
Right.
Education. Dr. Wandia, is there space for private universities, given that the private universities seem to have literally fallen over themselves trying to get more students, and we know that the more students they get, the more money they get?
I think, I think there's space for private universities, but hopefully we should be in a society where eventually the public universities are the best universities. And so whether people want to go to private or not should not be because they are running away from the public. I think that's the point, that you should not have people running away from public universities to go to private. If private can be there without people saying, I'm coming because I don't want to go to a public university, that is fine. But let me just say that we academics need to be more complex in our admiration for other universities, because in the US, the universities like Harvard and the Ivy League, they introduce equity problems because those universities are not accessible to the ordinary American. We're not even just talking about other people. They are not accessible. They introduce equity problems. And then also, universities, in my opinion, we are not supposed to be competing for accolades and prizes. What matters about a university is, are the graduates it's producing contributing to society? So whether we get Nobel Prizes or not, really, to me, is introducing this competitive thing that is making now universities want to spend more on PR and celeb lecturers because they are there, rather than improving the quality of education. So what we need is a difference in the logic of education. Education is supposed to contribute to society. Students who come out from the universities usually do more for society than students who do not. And that's the basic thing why we need to educate, to prepare Kenyans who can contribute to society, and that contribution can be either way. The other thing I want to say about this idea of specialization, if you look at the Harvards, we'll talk about Harvard Business School, but we're not talking about the Du Bois Center for African American Studies, which is very well funded and very well known. We're not talking about the Harvard Music School. So you see people cherry pick. They cherry pick certain programs, but they don't realize that actually even other programs are doing just as well. Noam Chomsky is a linguist, but he was at MIT. MIT is known for technology. So we can't do the specialization and say our university should be known for such and such. What matters is that universities are producing graduates who can address real problems facing society. Today. Whether we get Nobel Prizes for that, whether Gates Foundation gives us money for that, is really, if they do, fine, but that's not why we are doing it. We are doing it for society, and that is what universities have forgotten. They have forgotten that they are there for the people of Kenya. They have decided that money is more important, and others have decided prestige is more important. So that is why we have lost the way, but also vice chancellors are not being held to account, and the government needs to produce legislation to make expenditure of universities, whether private or public, open to everybody. We need to see where the money is going for and how it is being used. And how it's spent.
All right, and let me come to you, Prof. And another area that, of course, has affected our public universities is that of remuneration. We do have the lecturers currently on strike, and the reason why there is what maybe had been referred to earlier as moonlighting, where you have lecturers who possibly are attached to a public university, but for them to make their ends meet, would have to work here and there and offer what we'd call substandard education because they're spread too thin. And how do we address that, given that it is definitely a thorny issue?
Right, that's a good question, especially the one of moonlighting. I worked at Central Washington University for 8 years as Director of Africa Program, and I never did any moonlighting. Neither were my colleagues. I was in charge of
Is it because you are well paid, or is it because you had a passion?
Yes, that's one. Good salary is one. The second item is internal part-timing. There's a way in which you can arrange that if somebody has finished or addressed their 3 allocated courses per semester, that anything they teach extra is paid for. That actually disallows it. It discourages external moonlighting or external part-timing, so that you are basically within your university. But I wanted to raise the issue of competition. I don't think competition is unhealthy. Competition allows us to invent, it allows us to discover, it allows us to become innovative. If you just sit in a compromised manner that you're providing education and you're not actually discovering and creating patterns and trademarks, Kenya's universities will just be regular universities. But we are looking for a university which will be renowned across the world for research, for example, on medicine against AIDS, medicine against malaria, and so on. We must research like other universities. Harvard didn't just wake up and become #1 university in the world. It is about research output. Like Mkwai pointed out, our journals, How many of them have high impact rate? Only 5 journals in Kenya right now have impact of 5 and above. Only South Africa journals now are getting to 8, 9 there because of high rating. We must produce high quality research to be recognized globally. I still want to talk about the universities creating a niche for themselves. Stanford didn't just emerge to become the best law school in the world. It worked hard for that. Johns Hopkins didn't become the best medical research university in the world.
But I'm sure that working hard was within certain structures that
exactly.
you don't seem to have.
That's the point I want to bring in, that we can have collaborations, partnerships between public and private. There's a strong area of industry-university linkages that you want to start to exploit in Kenya. The issue of Harvard being a top university and the issue of University of California, let's say Berkeley or Los Angeles being a top universities, those are public universities, but they do compete. So there's need for the government to fund research. Research funding both in public and private universities. Harvard receives a lot of government funding through these students who are sponsored to Harvard and so on by the government. There are many students in Harvard who get in through affirmative action. Harvard admits at least 5% minorities. Those 5% will not be there if the government did not sponsor them to those universities. So the model that Kenya is pursuing is very, very much closely to what America pursues, that private universities can actually admit government students who are sponsored by the government. What I want to point out, and this is the major problem of disagreement with many scholars, is that if we make education efficient in this country and put quality checks in place, that your graduate comes in and that you ensure that there's an internal mechanism of ensuring that if he's coming in to do medicine, that all the standards, all the issues that a medical student is supposed to adhere to are adhered to. So that when he graduates, he can be employed in South Africa, in Kenya, in the US, in UK, so that we have global standards actually looking upon our graduates.
All right, Dr. Wandia, you seem to be in disagreement with Prof.
Yes. First of all, the Harvards are old universities. They are centuries old. They started with endowments from big shots. Like University of Virginia was started, I think, on Thomas Jefferson's land. So we need to be more realistic about what is happening with these universities. It wasn't competition in a market that puts Harvard at the top. It is a legacy of endowment, and then they can afford to attract the celeb professors. They can afford to pay them really well so that they research and don't teach. So there's also money and equity that is at play here. So to say that it was because of competition is not exactly correct. Also, competition is not a good model for creating partnerships and doing education, because people start to say, let's benchmark ourselves with who are getting the prizes, who is getting the donor money. And you can actually ignore local problems because that is not where the donor money is. And in fact, actually, that is currently the problem, because some universities have said, we don't care whether the research you're doing in your local area is important for your people. What matters is, does Bill Gates like it? Does the Rockefeller Foundation like it? And so we are starting to research on the agendas of other people just because they have money. So we need to be careful about what we are saying. And the state universities, which are really good in the US, are funded from the exchequer. And this was because there was need to have equity. There was need to open opportunities for the local the local people to go to university. So education is not just about competition and world class and everything. And actually, that was the problem of the neoliberal era that started with Mwai Kibaki. After that, universities started being given this agenda of you must be world-class, you must compete, you must get donor funding. It was the universities started being driven by external measures and not internal ones. Are we accountable to the students? Are we teaching them? Are we mentoring them? How are our classes going? We are no longer asking those questions. What we are asking is, are we meeting regulations? Are we getting money from outside? Are we known by outsiders? And that's why, eventually, the universities will start doing the PR, because it's easier to do PR if you want to get a name than to do research. Right. But Harvard comes from a different tradition. They have old money, slave money in some parts, which gave them the head start in education.
Where they are today.
They could afford to pay people to do the kinds of things that now they are
Prof,
doing.
I know you want to respond to that, but allow me to bring in Charles Bukwaya here. Charles, we are running out of time, so your closing comments. There's evidently no silver bullet that's going to sort us out, just one time. But where do we need to begin this journey of ensuring that our universities bring back education into their system?
Thank you, Mike. One of the things that needs to be done, first of all, our universities are perennially on strikes. And that is impacting on the quality of the graduates that we churn out every year. Because these boys and girls end up not having, covered their programs within the required time. And if they do, there's a bit of a rush then to catch up on the lost time. And therefore, there is need for the government and the rest of the stakeholders to come in and squarely deal with the problem of remuneration in the universities once and for all. For example, the current crisis in the universities that has been going on today is the 60th day. We feel that if the government had addressed this problem with the stakeholders on the table, it would bring industrial tranquility for the next 4 years. So that these 4 years, the students are busy in their classes, they are busy doing their research, and at the end of it all will be happy, including the parents who have paid fees. But look, the government has actually performed lackluster and lackadaisical on this particular aspect. It's hands-off, nonchalant approach, a don't-care attitude, and yet the students are not in class, and yet parents have paid their fees. We are just calling on the government that as much as we are saying it must come in and look at the management of these universities, because it is the parent. It must look at the remuneration. And if that remuneration is done well, the moonlighting that we're talking about will be a thing of the past. Time will be spent on the classroom.
All right, Prof, your closing comments.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I want to just point out that let us be ambitious as Kenyans. I'm a vice chancellor of a private university, Lukenya University, and it will be wrong on me as a vice chancellor not to want Lukenya to be like Harvard. We must aim high as Kenyans. And I will do everything possible to make sure that Lukenya University grows to the standard of Harvard. What I want to bring in is that Harvard started from somewhere, and Stanford and so on. In America, many parents want to take their children to private universities. Why? Because of many advantages. Today in Kenya, many students in public universities will not complete programs on time because of strikes and disturbances. So private universities offer an alternative. They offer an opportunity. So it will be very wrong to begin to condemn all private universities because one or two have failed in their mission.
All right.
It will be good to give all of them a chance, at least to develop in terms of quality, improve quality towards the developing human resources of this country and also the global market and so on.
All right.
And I think we have the ingredients. We have all the required elements that can make Kenya successful in terms of higher education control and management.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Wandia, your closing comments.
I'd like to say to Kenyans that this government is not interested in higher education, and the reason is a social one. If you have more graduates in the country, it means that they will be more critical as citizens and they will ask harder questions, as we've seen with the doctors and we've seen with the lecturers. So I think actually the reason why the government has been laid off is because they really don't care. They don't want university students to complete because that is another cohort of young people who will start asking hard questions about government expenditure, about democracy, and about rule of law. So Kenyans should know that they need to fight for education because their children have a right to it. And if the government really cared, they would care about how our lecturers are remunerated. And I also want to say that the reason why we have moonlighting is not just because of poor salaries. It's also because if you're a lecturer who really does your research output, you don't get promoted. You get vilified. So in the end, the people who make it are the ones who do the moonlighting and make the money and drive into their universities with big cars. That's just the thing. And so we need to go back to the real role of education. What is education for? We need to reward lecturers, not just monetarily, but to honor them for the work and the contribution they make to society. We need to get back to what education is really about, and not compare ourselves with others, but ask ourselves, what is the best we can do as Kenyans? And we've already set the precedent, and we can have good universities if we remember the people who have come before us, the people who we threw out in the 80s and 90s through exile and detention, because actually the effect of that oppression of lecturers is what we are experiencing today, because my generation of lecturers never got educated by those people who could have given us a good critical education. So this matter is complex, but at the bottom line is that we Kenyans must value higher education for what it brings to society, and we must fight against this corporatization and privatization of public higher education.
Thank you very much. I think we'll have to wind it up right there because of time. Dr. Wandia Njoya, Dr. Charles Muhwaya, and Professor Amutabi Morris for joining us this morning on The Way It Is. And that's a state of education, and I'll be reading your comments later on as we get to the tail end of the show. But for now, we're going to take a short break. Today is Monday. We've got Sports Chat lined up for you, so don't go away.